to be sad or mad or glad, sometimes even a cat, or very, very bad. Similarly, we also know what it's like to be creative. Now, I know some of you may balk at that, but it is true, right? When we are creative, we're most fully ourselves, for we are producing something.
Good morning. Today, we're going to be guided in our worship with some videos prepared for us by Reverend Karen Anderson. Reverend Karen is the intern minister in Brewster, Massachusetts. She has served congregations in Florida, New York, and Massachusetts for the last 25 years. She lives on a horse ranch in upstate New York and makes beautiful visual art, especially painting, and we'll see a bit of that today. So we're going to open our service today with a personal story of Reverend Anderson, which reminds us of how important we are to one another as we face the uncertainties of life and, from time to time, grow weary and allow inertia and complacency to leave us vulnerable in our journeys.
Good morning. I want to tell you a little story. Many years ago, I was married to someone else rather than my husband, Scott, right now. And we did a few things right. We have two fabulous children together, but we also went to Glacier National Park for our honeymoon. So the thing about Glacier, when you get there, they are very aware and always reminding you to wear bear bells because of grizzlies everywhere. So we got some bear bells when we first got there, and we'd go on hikes, and you're on a hike for like 7 miles and you kind of get sick of the bear bells. So at one point we take them off and we made up this song that we sang over and over again. And it was oh, Mr. Bear, don't give us a scare. We're afraid of you, Mr. Bear. Oh, Mama Bear, don't give us a scare. We're afraid of you, Mama Bear. Oh, Baby Bear, don't give us a scare. We're afraid of you, Baby Bear. So we would sing that song for a long time. So one time we're on this hike and we're way out, and we had sung that song for like, I don't know, an hour at least. And then we were sick of the song. So not only did we not have bear bells on, we weren't singing the song. And I sat down to tie my shoe, and this family walks past us. And they have a 11-year-old who's leading the way, and she's got bear bells on, ding, 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 ding. And the parents say hi and walk on by. We let them pass for a while, so we're not like on their tail. And then we start following, the same path, going back to the beginning. And about half an hour in, there is this slope that comes from the left-hand side with this very big boulder right to our left. And we get there, and the parents have this look on their face like a complete shock. And it turns out that a grizzly, while they were walking and their daughters in front of them, had come down, got to where the boulder was, heard the bear bells, and turned around and went back up the mountain again. And they were just kind of totally shook. Their daughter, not so much. Pete and I, completely shook. It was there. I put on bear bells again, and we followed them back to the trailhead, to the beginning. I have always been grateful to that little girl for helping to continue on our song, not with singing, but with bells. I do think it's one of the reasons that we come back to church, to be able to help continue on one another's song. Because sometimes we get tired, or we're just not feeling well, or whatever it is, but we need other people to pick up our song and help us move forward with singing and, really living fully into this life. And that's what we can do best with each other, is help one another with our own song. Welcome to our celebration of life. It's so good to be with you guys today.
So with those opening words and the beautiful music with Brian, I'd like to welcome you to pick up our song together at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Berkeley. I'm Jason, and I'll be your worship associate today, with a special call out to Karen Elliott, who contributed an exceptional amount of effort this week as my co-WA in preparing today's service. Thank you, Karen. UUCB is a welcoming congregation, and we're always working on how to better embrace and care for one another. If this is your first time here, we're so glad you've come. And whoever you are, we welcome you in the fullness of who you are. As we begin, it's our practice to acknowledge that this church occupies land in Huichin, the unceded territory of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. We understand that we continue to benefit from the seizure and occupation of this land. We acknowledge and embrace our responsibility to take restorative action. We affirm that this is deeply felt and commit our congregation to be in right relationship with Indigenous communities, aligning in solidarity, supporting Indigenous projects, and caring properly for the land. Do I have Lynn can come join us here as she will light our chalice this morning? We'll kindle our flame with these words by Julianne Lepp. We seek our place in the world and the answers to our heart's deep questions. As we seek, may our hearts be open to unexpected answers. May the light of our chalice remind us that ours is a community of warmth, of wisdom, and welcoming of multiple truths. And now, please rise in body or spirit to join us in singing our opening song, We Gather Together, number 360 in the gray hymnal, and the words will be on the screen.
One more slide. Can we move forward one more slide? Because the title and the number are different. We Gather Together is the one we are singing.
Okay. Number 349.
So if you're looking in the hymnal, it's 349.
Please remain standing and join me with saying our covenant. Love guides this church, the quest for truth and justice, its common purpose. To give thanks, listen deeply, speak with care, honor our differences, and seek and grant forgiveness. These things we covenant with one another. Please be seated. I'd like to invite Lynn Cahoon up, who will share with us Time for All Ages.
Good morning. I'm going to read a story, one of my favorites, Toad and Frog Are Friends by Arnold Lobel. And the pictures are small, so I ask you to stay in your seat and use your imagination. This is the letter. Toad was sitting on his front porch. Frog came along and said, "What is the matter, Toad? You are looking sad." "Yes," said Toad. "This is my sad time of day. It is the time when I wait for the mail to come. It always makes me very unhappy." "Why is that?"
asked Frog.
Because I never get any mail, said Toad. Not ever? Asked Frog. No, never, said Toad. No one has ever sent me a letter. Every day, my mailbox is empty. That is why waiting for the mail is a sad time for me.
Frog and Toad sat on the porch, feeling sad together. Then Frog said, I have to go home now, Toad. There's something I must do. And Frog hurried home. He found a pencil and a piece of paper, and he wrote on the paper. He put the paper in an envelope, and on the envelope he wrote, a letter for Toad. Frog ran out of the house. He saw a snail that he knew. Snail, said Frog, please take this letter to Toad's house and put it in his mailbox. Sure, said the snail. Right away. Then Frog ran back to Toad's house. Toad was in bed taking a nap. Toad, said Frog, I think you should get up and wait for the mail some more. No, said Toad. I am tired of waiting for the mail. Frog looked out the window at Toad's mailbox. The snail was not there yet. Toad, said Frog, you never know when someone may send you a letter. No, no, said Toad. I do not think that anyone will ever send me a letter. Frog looked out the window. The snail was not there yet. But Toad, said Frog, somebody may send you a letter today. Don't be silly, said Toad. No one has ever sent me a letter before, and no one will send me a letter today. Frog looked out the window. The snail was still not there. Frog, why do you keep looking out of the window? Asked Toad. Because now I am waiting for the mail, said Frog. But there won't be any, said Toad. Oh, yes, there will, said Frog, because I have sent you a letter. What did you write in the letter? Frog said. I wrote, Dear Toad, I am glad that you are my best friend. Your best friend, Frog. Oh, said Toad, that makes a very good letter. Then Frog and Toad went out on the front porch to wait for the mail. They sat there feeling happy together. Frog and Toad waited a long time. 4 days later, the snail got to Toad's house and gave him the letter from Frog, and Toad was pleased to have it. And may you have good friends, and may you be a good friend too.
I have trouble giving a brief answer to the question of whether God exists or not. And as Unitarian Universalists, we all have different answers to that question. But to behave as if God exists, that for me is the one rule for living, which governs all others. And in that spirit, I invite you to close your eyes and share a prayer I've composed, inspired by the story of carrying each other's song and the fireflies of genius as brought to us by Reverend Karen Anderson. Spirit of love and compassion, we gather in this sacred space, Unitarian Universalists, bound together by our shared values, diverse in our beliefs. In this community, we strive to embrace the beauty of our differences, to honor the unique melodies within each soul, to carry each other's song, and to light each other's way. May we be mindful of the struggles we face, the burdens we hold in our hearts, the bear behind the boulder. May we listen with open hearts and minds to the stories and experiences of others. May we learn from one another's wisdom and find harmony in our diversity. May we glow in the sparks of divine genius emanating from one another, the fireflies of inspiration shared between us as manna from heaven, sustaining us in life and connecting us with the eternal. Spirit of courage and creativity, may we continue to carry each other's song, and may our fireflies light the way for one another in this community and beyond. Amen.
When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love.
We all know what it feels like to be sad or mad or glad, sometimes even a cad, or very, very bad. Similarly, we also know what it's like to be creative. Now, I know some of you may balk at that, but it is true, right? When we are creative, we're most fully ourselves, for we are producing something that is both novel and then also useful in a particular social setting. And you can often feel that kind of magical combination of being unique and playful, productive, and sometimes even have that like transcendent feeling come over you. And this is true whether we are creating anything really, whether that is a short story or an Excel sheet, a painting or a PowerPoint, maybe even a new recipe, right? A new curriculum, or even a new ice cream flavor. The Unitarian process theologian Henry Nelson Wyman understood this power of creativity and even went so far as to associate it with the experience of the divine. Okay, so Wyman defined God as a process, not as a persona, as an experience, not as an entity. And he believed God happened to us and often like in between us. In his mind, God was a verb, not a noun. And every time we engage each other or ideas in a way that creates something new, we are experiencing God, the divine. That's what Wyman posited. And he concluded that it is the thing that drives us to interact creatively, right? It's the urge to kind of bump into each other with new ideas and express ourselves. This experience of creation in the novel is what we were built for, Wyman actually believed. And so no wonder he proclaimed we are most fully human when we create. Now, given that fact, actually, that the creative impulse is both sacred and magical, it's a little confounding why we don't seek it out more often. And why, dear ones, do we do that when we conjure up reasons to not be creative? Well, I think it's complicated, and I kind of want to get on that a little bit. And every now and then I feel like perhaps it's more accurate to say, no wonder we feel most depleted actually when creativity falls just like outside of our reach. So my hope is today that we can explore some ways to pull the creative impulse back into our reach, making it more accessible and regular. Because let's be honest, this creative interchange, as Wyman called it, is truly one of the greatest blessings of being human and is in each and every one of us. So I think many of us would agree, though, that one of the primary reasons we get tripped up around creativity has to do with, like not thinking of ourselves as creative, has to do also with fear and judgment. We may have had an elementary school teacher that told us dogs don't look like pigs or penguins don't look like fire hydrants, right? We might have had a high school English teacher who told us that our metaphors were stale and kind of old. We might have had a camp director that told us that we never are going to be able to act. The world, actually, of art and critique is really big. And I want you to think about all the genres of what we contribute to being like a creative field, right? Like film and theater and dance and art and literature. They all have critics that are involved with that process and then spit out criticism to all of us about whether or not it's worth going to anything, right? Every studio art class I had in college, and my undergrad is in art, and I had about 70 studio art classes and across all kinds of different genres. And the reality is, I don't think ever an assignment came out where you didn't have some kind of critique of the work. And it wasn't the experience of having, your piece and something you're kind of like proud of for doing, or, you had a great technique, or you're trying something novel or new. Every time it came down to kind of this analysis or a comment, as in a critique of the work, not of like, hey, that rocks, man. I love that you just did that. There was always a slicing and dicing of what you had just produced. And I don't know, it's a debilitating, kind of humbling process. Truth is, we've all, though, I do believe this, have experienced somewhere along the line, if it's not from professionals, it also came from our family or our friends or our coworkers, right? And on top of that critique, though, from others, we can also turn inward and wrestle with our own inadequacies or comparisons and then self-judgment to someone else. And we can so easily misunderstand that co-creation with the divine is not ultimately really about leaving some kind of like legacy behind. And it's not about what secures any kind of prestige for us. It's not a means to shore up and validate our self-worth, as if holding some kind of magical power that if we could just be validated through this creative endeavor, the world would be saying to us that we actually matter. And that's kind of crazy when you think about that. I have written in my notes, blah. That's what I think of that. Can you see how dangerous actually that way of thinking about being creative is? It can get us completely devoid of wanting actually to create anything for fear of critique or judgment or admonishment. And I get why people tell themselves, you know what, I'm not creative at all. I'm strictly an analytical person, not an ounce of creativity in me. To which actually I say to that, that's a bunch of hogwash. It just is. You are human, and thus you're living, you're being alive, almost demands that you engage with the creative process. A couple of years ago, the beloved comedian Gary Shandling died at 66. And The Guardian did this wonderful, almost requiem of sorts on his life. And they lifted up the time that Shandling was on this show that's online that Jerry Seinfeld has called Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. And this particular show is kind of a portrait of their friendship and affection towards one another. And it starts off by, Gary giving Jerry a big hug and saying, I love you. And Jerry saying, well, I love you back. Now, Shandling in particular was known for being a very empathetic and kind person, which isn't what you normally say, about most comedians, but he was thought of that way. So this whole show is the two of them talking while they're in this Porsche driving around. And at one point, Seinfeld mentions the comic David Brenner. And he says, David Brenner passed away last year. And do you ever think about like all that material? And Shandling kind of like laughs and says, I'm at that stage in my life where I actually care about the person. He says, kind of fond and amused all at the same time. But Seinfeld won't let go of this idea. And he says, but all that material, you work so hard on it. It's just gone. It doesn't mean anything to anyone anymore. And then Shandling replies, that material and your material is purely a way for you to express your spirit and your soul and your being. And then Seinfeld says, it doesn't have any value beyond that. And Shandling says, it doesn't have any value beyond you expressing yourself spiritually in a very soulful, spiritual way. And then he laughs and he looks at Jerry and he says, Jerry, it's why you're on the planet, man. It's why you're on the planet. The creative endeavor, as Shanley says to Jerry, has no value except to express yourself spiritually in a very soulful, unique way to you. It's about expressing, not impressing. I love that. If we looked at creativity in such a manner, we would indeed let go of the need to leave a legacy, to garner prestige, to kind of validate ourselves, right? We would let go of judgments from self and from others, because they are irrelevant to the way of thinking about creativity. The truth and lesson of Shanley have to offer is very simple. Creativity, our creativity, is experienced for our well-being, period. That's it. It is our interchange with the divine, our way to be most human, to experience kind of that vastness of the human experience, not to be judged or to judge another, right? Or to be made worthy. But creativity is our way to express ourselves, not impress ourselves or others. So guidepost number 1, right? Here we are. Express, not impress. Many of my artist friends have taught me another thing that keeps creativity just outside of our reach sometimes. And it's our belief that creativity is something that we are. In other words, like we are a creative being or not. Now, on first blush, it may not be such a bad thing to think of creativity as something that we have or are, but it's dangerous. And here I'm going to turn to the ancient world to explain, okay? So the ancient Greeks and the Romans didn't believe that creativity came from a human being. They believed that creativity was a separate divine attendant spirit that came to human beings from some distant and unknowable source for distant and unknowable reasons, right? Okay, so the Greeks famously called these divine attendant spirits daemons. Socrates famously believed that he had a daemon who spoke wisdom to him from afar. And the Romans had the same idea, but they didn't call them daemons. They called the creative spirit a genius. The Romans did not believe that a particularly, how do I say, I missaid that. So they didn't believe that a particular person was creative. They believed that a clever person had a genius. Okay, they believed in these cases a genius like literally lived in the walls of a baker or an artist, and when they needed them, they would come out and help shape the outcome of the work, kind of like the house elf Dobby from Harry Potter. Okay, which is kind of cool, mainly because it gave artists like this psychological construct to protect themselves from the results of their own work. And everyone accepted that is how it functioned, right? In fact, this one author comments on this whole way of thinking about this that I find really interesting. They say, if your work was brilliant, you could take all the credit for it. Everyone knew that you had this disembodied genius who helped you. Likewise, if your work kind of bombed, it wasn't entirely your fault, right? Everyone knew that your genius was kind of lame at the time, or having an off day, or may even be hungover. That is how people thought of creativity in the West. That is until the Renaissance came around, right? Okay, so the Renaissance came around and everything changed. The Renaissance ushered in the beginning of rational humanism. Now, rational humanism put the individual being at the center of the universe above all gods and mysteries, so there wasn't room for such mystical otherness. And for the first time in history, at least in the West, you heard people refer to this or that artist as being a genius, not having a genius. And perhaps in that change is where the big error actually is. It's a little hard to have one person, like one little tiny human being, be the vessel, the essence, the source of all divine, creative, unknowable external mystery. That's a lot for the human psyche to handle. And when the creative inspiration does not embody a creative person, when it seems on strike or on a long vacation or even hungover, when the maddening, somewhat capricious nature of the creative process is intermittent or elusive, what happens now, right? Well, often there's a lot of damning of self, of one's talent and spirit, which in turn makes one's faith in oneself wane. There's a poet, Ruth Stone, who talks about how a poem would come to her, okay? She said that when she was growing up in rural Virginia, she would be working in the fields, and she said a poem would come, and she could feel it and hear a poem coming through and over the landscape. And she said it was like this thunderous roar that would come barreling down at her over the landscape. And it would keep coming, right? And it would shake the earth beneath her feet. This is how she talked about it. She knew that she only had one thing to do at that point. When this poem was barreling at her, she had to run like hell to the house to grab a piece of paper and a pencil so she could get the whole poem down. Other times, though, she wasn't fast enough to get back to the house. She'd be running and running and running, and she'd get there and she'd feel the poem, she said, like come through her and out of her. And she talked about that as being, then the poem was off looking for another poet. Then there were times that she was so close, like she's running, she's getting in the house. Poem comes through her and she grabs the poem right at the end and she pulls it back, and she said it would show up on her page backwards from the back of the poem. The end of the poem was at the beginning and it would go backwards on her page. Elizabeth Gilbert, the author of the long-standing New York Times bestseller Eat, Pray, Love, talks about kind of that process and how this woman, Ruth, talked about how a poem came to her. And she said this: that isn't my process. I am not the pipeline. I'm a mule. And the way I have to work is I get up at the same time every day and I sweat and I labor and I kind of barrel through it. And it's really awkward. But even I, in my mulishness, have brushed up against that thing at times, ideas that come from this like source that I don't know where, honestly. And what is that thing? How are we to relate to it in a way that will not make us lose our minds, but in fact, keep us sane? And there's the rub, right? The way we think of creativity currently makes it hard to keep sane all the time, because it involves self-criticism and judgment. Because when we are not feeling creative or inspired, we feel betrayed by our creative selves. And that is almost like a suffocating feeling and response. It can and often does debilitate us. So friends, I need to just say, this new way of thinking of creativity just opened up a whole new world to me, one that felt free and expressive and way less harmful to yourself. Tom Waits, the musician, I once heard have this interview on NPR, and it was this great way of explaining almost what I've been talking about, right? So he's saying that he used to have this process of creating a song that was pretty much the embodiment, he said, of the tortured contemporary modern artist trying to control and manage and dominate these sort of uncontrollable creative impulses that were totally internalized. And then he got older and calmer, and one day he's driving down the interstate in LA and he says everything changed for him. He's speeding along and he hears this little like fragment of a melody, and it comes in as inspiration to him, and it's elusive and it's a tantalizing melody. It's gorgeous and he like longs for it, but he's driving, right? He has no way to get down what's going on, what's coming to him with a piece of paper or a pencil or even a tape recorder. So he starts to feel all that old anxiety raise up in him again. And he's thinking, I'm going to lose this thing and I'll be haunted by this song forever. And I'm not good enough. I can't do it. And instead of panicking, though, he just stopped. He just terminated that whole like mental, ridiculous process that was happening in his head. And he said he looked up in the sky and he said, "Excuse me, can you not see that I am driving right now? Do I look like I can write a song down? If you really want to exist, come back at a more opportune time. Or go bug Leonard Cohen right now. Leonard Cohen. Go bug him." And his whole work process changed after that. Not the work, he said, was often as dark as it ever was, but the process and that heavy anxiety around it was released when he took the genie, the genius, out of him where it was causing nothing but trouble and released it back to where it came from. You see, he realized this didn't have to be this internalized, tormented thing. It could be this peculiar, kind of wondrous, bizarre collaboration, a kind of conversation between Tom and the strange external thing that was not quite Tom. I love that story. I am much saner when I think of my muse, not in me, but as a brush with something that I can't really quite explain. When conditions are right, I think of the process as being an expansive kind of Midwest field with clover and those little beautiful blue flowers, and there are all these lightning bugs. And I can just go out and catch all of these lightning bugs in that jar. And I feel full and like I've got a gazillion ideas. But sometimes when conditions are okay, I can go out in that field and I can get a few lightning bugs in my jar. And then there are times where I missed the opportunity, right? Like it got too dark, the fireflies aren't around anymore, and they're gone. I waited too long. And I have come to think of those moments as a means to practice like this deep trust that I know that they will return to me when I need them, that I may have lost that one or that group of fireflies, but something else will arrive. Sometimes, too, it comes by the skin of my teeth, but it always comes. I have found this method to not only keep me sane, but it also gives me more freedom to let go and let God, as some people say, which I know sounds strange from a non-theist to say that, but I mean it as simply being open to the creative impulse that any creation I create is not totally of my own doing. I need to tell you that I've been doing an interim now for 2 years, but for the 5 years before that, I took a break from a settled ministry job to interim work, and I did art full time. So my undergrad was in art, and I had a whole business around what I was doing. And I had this friend once say to me, like, Karen, how can you get rid of all these drawings? Like, I don't get it. You just give them away or they sell, and doesn't that like freak you out? And so I want to just show you like some of the stuff that I do. So this is printed obviously, but I draw with marker on paper, and it's a goofy take on American Gothic, right? Okay, so anyway, this friend was like, I don't know how you do it. And I almost do it as a spiritual discipline now to get rid of as many different pieces of my original art. I have scans of things, right? Or I have, them or copies of them, but I don't need the original. And I do that. I give everything away, or I have sold it, because I need to believe that that creative impulse will come to me when I need it. And it's released me from that like self-tormenting worry and judgment and fear. And when I can have faith in my fireflies, right? I usher in this beauty in my life. And I am connected to something that keeps me grounded and whole and duly joyful. Henry Nelson Wyman, our UU theologian, did not speak of God with a will, intentionality, or a consciousness to it, but rather as a creative exchange, an impulse to share that which is most deeply human with others. Whether that, as I said, short story, Excel sheet, a recipe that you're working on, something with gardening, a PowerPoint, an algorithm, even a new ice cream flavor. And in those creative endeavors, we will have transcendent moments. They may be fleeting or lengthy, but they exist and they delight. So friends, during this month of creativity, may we heed Gary Shandling's wisdom to express, not impress, and the ancients' belief that the creative impulse is ours to interact with as an external friend and muse, as a genius that is out there that will come to us, not us as genius. I do believe, actually, that if we took those on as our tidbits of wisdom, the learned theologian Wyman, if you were still alive, be sitting there amongst all of you with a big smile on his face, and he'd be passing out to all of you pieces of paper and pencil. And he'd tell you to get to it. Explore, have faith, unite with that which makes you whole and alive. So carpe diem, my friends, and to all a good night. May it be so. Amen.
Weren't we fortunate to have that today? Well, we are coming to the part in our service where we'd like to invite you to make an offering, but I'd like to go off script a little bit in regards to the video that we've seen and creativity and creative genius. For those of you that know that my particular expression of creativity is in finance. And I'd like to invite you today to turn your cards over. There's a QR code where it'll lead you to a website where you can give, or you can put cash or check into the envelope in front of you, or any certificate of highly appreciated stock that you happen to have with you, you can put in there, enjoy a step up in cost basis, and take the tax benefit in the current year and drop it into the box in the atrium. Thank you. Every month we share half of our offerings with a nonprofit organization, a good neighbor that's recommended by our Social Justice Council. And your offering of any value is always received with gratitude. And the good neighbor for this month is Bay Area Outreach and Recreation Program, BORP. And BORP works to improve the health, independence, and social integration of people with physical disabilities through sports, fitness, and recreation programs. And we're honored today to welcome the BORP Executive Director, Emily Seelenfund.
Hello. My name is Emily, and I've been pretty much obsessed with sports since I was a little kid. The reason I became the executive director of BORP is because I know how difficult it can be for people with disabilities to access sports and recreation. The goal of BORP is to break down those barriers so that people with all types of physical and vision disabilities can do things like kayak, hand cycle, play wheelchair basketball, play goalball, play power soccer, go on hikes, and so much more. We all know it's super important to get fit and stay active, as our doctors tell us. But for many of the 1,500 participants of BORP, our programs are about more than just staying fit and active. For many, BORP is their community. BORP is their pathway to independence. BORP is their way to rebuild their lives after a spinal cord injury. We are the only comprehensive adaptive sports organization in the entire Bay Area, and most of our programming is located right here in Berkeley. That means that people actually come from all over the Bay Area to access our programming. I was just talking to a mom last week who drives her son over an hour and a half just to get to wheelchair basketball practice. My vision for BORP is to push out our programming across the Bay Area so that communities in the South Bay and in San Francisco can find fitness basically as easy as I find it right here, right now in Berkeley. We'd be so honored if you consider making a donation to our cause, but BORP also relies on a lot of volunteers. So if you're interested in volunteering either your time or your money, please feel free to check out our website, borp.org. You can always shoot me an email, emily@borp.org. I'd love to chat with you about why sports and recreation for people with disabilities is so important. Thank you so much, and happy Disability Pride Month.
So please join me in dedicating our offering. We dedicate our offering and ourselves to the mission of this congregation, to create loving community, inspire spiritual growth, and encourage lives of integrity, joy, and service. Well, it's been good being here today, but before we shift to our coffee hour, I'd like to remind you to check out all the things that are available in our congregation by exploring our website at uucb.org. And there you'll find a link to news to the week ahead, our weekly email newsletter, which includes a list of activities, announcements, and contact information. And as we prepare to leave the worship service, please be aware that next Sunday we'll be joined by UU musician Jim Scott for what is sure to be a great service. Jim will lead the service with an integrated theme titled Gaia, Mother Earth, and the Oneness of Everything. Now, please rise in body or spirit and join in singing our closing song, We Are a Gentle, Angry People, which is number 170 in the gray hymnal, and the words will be on the screen.
Gentle, angry people.
Now, may the love of truth guide you, the warmth of love hold you, and the spirit of peace bless you, this day and in the days to come. Amen, and blessed be.